Welcome to the world of precious Ramotswe, kind, observant, and always guided by common sense and a good cup of bush tea. Tell us where in the world you are listening from. It brings us joy to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more cases from Botswana. The morning sun had not yet reached its full strength when Ma Precious Ramotswe stepped onto her veranda at Zebra Drive. The air was still soft, touched with the coolness that clung to the land before the heat came down from the sky. She carried her cup of red bush tea, balanced carefully in her broad, capable hand, and settled into the chair that overlooked her small but much-loved garden. From here she could see the acacia tree that bent slightly to one side, and the neat row of flowers that Ma Grace Makutsi insisted would never grow properly in such soil, but which, to everyone's surprise, had pushed their heads through regardless. Botswana mornings, she thought, were among the most reliable blessings in the world, like cattle that came home each evening, or friends who remembered you year after year. She sipped the tea slowly. Its familiar, earthy sweetness had a way of reaching not only the throat, but the soul. That was the miracle of red bush tea. It was a drink that reminded you to be calm, to think carefully, to allow the world to unfold at its own pace. And on this morning, her mind went to her father, the late Obed Ramotswe, the finest man she had ever known. His voice came back to her with startling clarity, as it so often did in quiet moments. "Cattle do not hurry," he had once told her. "They move steadily, one hoof after another. That is how a man should move too. Steadily, carefully, not rushing into foolishness." It was good advice. How often had she remembered it when confronted with the troubles of clients at the No.1 ladies' detective agency? A woman who feared her husband was straying, a man who suspected a partner of dishonesty, a shopkeeper whose books did not add up. All those cases had tested her patience, but in the end, the truth always revealed itself, just as cattle will eventually appear on the horizon if you give them time. And so, this morning, she let her father's words echo in her heart, wondering what new test of patience might soon come. A faint sound interrupted her reflections, the rattle of bicycle chains. She looked up in time to see the apprentices from Clockweng Road's speedy motors pedalling past, wobbling slightly as they competed with each other in speed. Charlie, the more reckless of the two, was leaning far forward, his shirt untucked and flapping like a sail. Fanwell, steadier but still capable of foolishness, pedalled behind with an expression that said he was determined not to be beaten. The sight brought a smile to her lips. Young men could be relied upon to treat life as a race, she thought. But where did that racing lead? She watched them disappear around the corner, dust rising in their wake, and she wondered what kind of men they would become. Would they be dependable, like her dear husband Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, gentle, patient, honest in all things? Or would they be like some others she had known, quick to promise, but slower to keep those promises, charming at first, but unsteady when responsibility came knocking at the door? Trust and honesty, she mused, were the very foundations of life. They were simple words, often repeated, but they demanded great strength to uphold. A promise broken could weigh more heavily on a heart than a load of bricks on a lorry. Her gaze wandered back to the acacia tree, whose branches swayed gently despite the absence of any wind. That tree, too, had its lesson. It had grown bent, not straight, yet it still stood firm, still offered shade, still put out its leaves when the rains came. People were much the same, she thought. Few were perfectly straight, most bent this way or that under the pressures of life. But if they stood firm, if they gave what shelter they could, then they were good enough. Perhaps that was the true meaning of trust, not perfection, but endurance. A small bird darted past her, a flash of yellow in the morning light, and settled in the branches. Its song was cheerful, even insistent, as if reminding her not to sink too far into heavy thoughts. She laughed quietly to herself. Yes, this was no morning for gloom. It was a morning to be grateful, to breathe in the scent of the earth, to thank the sky for its light. Still, beneath that gratitude, there was a quiet unease, like a shadow cast by a distant cloud. Something was coming. She felt it. Perhaps it was simply the way of detectives to sense that a case was about to knock upon the door, or perhaps it was a whisper from her father's spirit. Either way, she knew that her peaceful morning might not remain untouched for long. She raised her cup again, drained the last of the tea, and placed it carefully on the table. Then she folded her hands in her lap and sat still for a few more minutes, allowing the world to settle around her. There would be work at the agency soon enough, and Ma Makutsi would arrive with her brisk remarks and her large round glasses that seemed always to glare at somebody. There would be clients to listen to, apprentices to worry about, and cars for Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni to repair. Yes, life in Botswana was never short of demands. But for now, on this veranda, with the morning still young, she allowed herself the luxury of peace. That same morning, as Ma Ramotswe had predicted in her heart, the peace of Zebra Drive did not last long. By the time she had walked the short distance to the office, unlocked the familiar door, and arranged her desk in its usual order, tea on the left, blotter in the middle, pens aligned neatly in the chipped mug, there was already a sense of waiting in the air. The No.1 Ladies Detective Agency, the very first of its kind in all of Botswana, had been founded to listen to such waiting. People came not only for facts, but for the kindness of being heard. Ma Makutsi was already there, of course. She had arrived earlier than usual, her sharp eyes magnified by the large round glasses that sat firmly on her nose. She greeted her employer with the seriousness of one who had scored 97% at the Botswana Secretarial College and never let a day pass without reminding the world of it, either directly or by implication. On this morning, she was tapping her pen against a notebook, ready for whatever business might arrive. "Someone is coming," she announced, as if she herself had arranged the visit. "I could tell from the way the dust moved on the road. It is not ordinary dust. It is the dust of footsteps with worry." Ma Ramotswe chuckled softly. "Dust tells many stories, Ma. Let us see what story this one brings." A few minutes later, the door opened and a young woman stepped hesitantly into the office. She was neatly dressed in a skirt and blouse, her hair tied back with a ribbon that had once been bright but now carried the wear of daily use. Her eyes, however, told more than her clothes. They carried the heavy weight of someone who had not slept easily for many nights. "Dumela Ra, or Ma," she began, uncertainly. "Dumela Ma," said Ma Ramotswe warmly. She rose and extended her hand. "You are most welcome here. Please sit. This is the No.1 Ladies Detective Agency. I am Ma Ramotswe, and this is my assistant, Ma Makutsi." The young woman took the seat, perching on the edge as if ready to flee should the shame of her words become too much. Her voice trembled as she gave her name. "Mfo." She explained, haltingly at first, that she was engaged to a man called Thabiso. He was a clerk at the post office, a man with a steady job and good manners, admired by her family for his prospects. But lately, her hands twisted together as she spoke, he had begun to change. "He does not come when he says he will," she whispered. "He makes excuses, always busy, always tired, and when I ask him directly, his eyes look away. I think there is another woman." The words hung in the room like smoke. Ma Makutsi adjusted her glasses with a brisk snap. "Men are like that," she declared. "Many men will smile at you today and at another woman tomorrow. It is always the way. Only a few are truly faithful. Look at Mr. Futi Radifuti, my husband. That is one of the rare ones. But most? Tisk!" She clicked her tongue in deep disapproval. Ma Ramotswe glanced at her assistant with patient amusement. "We must not judge before we know, Ma. Sometimes there are reasons that look bad, but are not bad at all." Turning back to Empho, she asked gentle questions. Had Thabiso been unkind? Had he spoken of ending the engagement? No, the young woman admitted. He had not spoken so. But the silences between them were growing longer, and she felt as though she stood on a ledge, waiting for the ground to vanish beneath her. Her family, she added with a flush of shame, had already spent much on the wedding preparations. Her mother had sewn dresses. Her father had paid for goats to be slaughtered. If Thabiso were to leave her now, the whole family would suffer embarrassment, and her own heart would break besides. Ma Ramotswe listened carefully, nodding at the right moments. It was not just the suspicion of betrayal that hurt this client. It was the burden of family expectation, the fear of public disgrace. In Botswana, a wedding was never simply between two people. It was between two families, even two communities. To fail at such a promise was not merely to wound one heart, but to shake the dignity of many. "You have done the right thing to come here," Ma Ramotswe said at last, her voice full of reassurance. "We shall make some quiet inquiries. We shall see what is happening. Then you may decide what is best, with truth to guide you." Empho's shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes still glistened with worry. She clasped her handbag tightly, as if it were the only firm thing she could hold. "Thank you, Ma," she murmured. "If there is hope, I wish to know. And if there is no hope, I must know that too." When she had gone, the office settled into silence again. Ma Makutsi tapped her pen more fiercely than before. "I tell you, Ma, this man is already guilty. You will see. He is probably walking with another woman right now." "Perhaps," said Ma Ramotswe softly. "Or perhaps not. Let us remember that the truth is often quieter than we expect. We shall watch and we shall listen. That is the work of detectives." She reached for the teapot, poured a fresh cup, and set it before her assistant. For even in the face of a young woman's heartbreak, tea must be drunk and calm must be kept. That, too, was a kind of detective work, the art of patience. And as she raised her own cup, she thought again of her father's words. Cattle move steadily, one hoof after another. Yes, she would follow the hoofprints of this case, slowly and carefully, until they led to the truth. Ma Precious Ramotswe did not believe in rushing, not in ordinary life, and certainly not in detective work. When people hurried, they often missed what was right in front of their eyes, and in her experience, the truth rarely shouted. It preferred to whisper. That was why, on the following morning, she found herself standing quietly outside the post office in Gaborone, her handbag tucked neatly under her arm, her wide figure blending into the bustle of people coming and going. The post office was one of those buildings that everyone in Botswana knew. Its walls were painted a faded cream, with patches where the sun had bleached the colour to almost white. Inside, there was always a faint smell of paper and ink, of glue from stamps, and of dust carried in on the feet of countless customers. It was a place where secrets passed unnoticed. Love letters and business invoices, telegrams and brown paper parcels, all handled by clerks who stamped and sorted with routine precision. Among those clerks was Thabiso, the young man who now stood at the centre of Mfo's troubled heart. Ramotswe had chosen a bench across the street, half in shadow, where she could see through the glass doors. She watched without appearing to watch, her gaze drifting casually from a vendor's cart to the road, back to the entrance. Patience, she reminded herself, was a detective's strongest tool. At first, there was nothing unusual. She saw Thabiso at his counter, his tie neatly knotted, his hair carefully brushed. He served customers politely, taking parcels, weighing envelopes, answering questions. But then, after half an hour, her sharp eyes noticed something. When a young woman approached his desk, tall, neatly dressed, with bright earrings that caught the light, Thabiso's face changed. His smile widened, and his eyes lingered too long. Their voices blended into laughter, the kind of laughter that belongs more to a friend than to a customer. And when she handed him her papers, his fingers rested an instant longer than necessary. Ramotswe frowned slightly. It was not yet proof of unfaithfulness. People laughed together in Botswana. Men and women shared jokes without meaning harm. But there was a difference, she thought, between polite laughter and laughter that lingered like a shadow. This had been the latter. She made a mental note and continued to observe. When the woman left, Thabiso followed her with his eyes until she was gone from sight. Then he returned to his work, a little too quickly, as if caught in an act he hoped would be forgotten. Later that day, when the lunch hour brought a lull, Ramotswe shifted her attention to the staff moving about the side of the building. She had long ago discovered that cleaners often knew more than anyone else. Cleaners, after all, saw everything. The late-night conversations, the papers left behind, the expressions on faces when the day's masks had slipped. She approached two women who were emptying bins into a large sack. They greeted her politely, as people in Botswana always did, and she responded with warmth. After a few gentle remarks about the heat and the price of mealie meal, she asked casually whether the clerks worked hard. "They work, yes," one of the cleaners said, tightening the knot on the bag. "But some work harder than others." The other woman laughed, shaking her head. "That Thabiso, he is always walking with that girl. You know the one, tall, with the earrings. They go together many times. We see them. He says he is busy, but busy with what?" The first woman chuckled. "Busy with walking, busy with talking." The two women exchanged amused glances, and then they went back to their work. Ramotswe thanked them kindly, but her heart was heavy. These remarks confirmed what she had seen. Thabiso's attentions were not a single incident, but a pattern. Still, she told herself firmly, this was not enough to condemn him. Cleaners, like everyone else, sometimes embroidered their tales. Laughter could grow into romance in the telling. A detective must not allow gossip to become evidence. As she walked back toward Zebra Drive, the sun climbing higher overhead, her thoughts drifted to her own past. She remembered Note Makoti, her first husband, who had once charmed her with promises and music. He had danced well, and she had believed that a man who moved so gracefully must have a graceful soul. But that had not been so. Behind the charm had lain cruelty, and his promises had proved lighter than the smoke of a cooking fire. It had taken her strength and her father's wisdom to step away from that marriage. Now, looking at Thabiso, she felt again the weight of those memories. A smile could conceal weakness. Laughter could hide dishonesty. She would not rush to judgment, but neither would she dismiss the signs that had presented themselves so clearly. Back at the office, she found Ma Makutsi already waiting with her notebook. Her assistant's glasses seemed to flash with curiosity. "Well, Ma?" she asked. "What did you see?" Ma Ramotswe settled into her chair, setting her handbag down with deliberate calm. "I saw a young man at his work, and I saw him laughing with another young woman, but laughing does not always mean betrayal." Ma Makutsi sniffed. "Men always laugh when they are guilty. They laugh to cover their guilt. That is what I have observed. At the Botswana Secretarial College, we were taught that you must look at the evidence, and the evidence is that this man is guilty." Her shoes, new, with pointed toes that seemed to disapprove of everything, creaked faintly, as if agreeing with her verdict. Ma Ramotswe smiled patiently. "Evidence is important, Ma, but so is patience. We shall look more carefully before we decide." The office fell quiet for a while. Outside, the sound of cattle being driven down the road drifted faintly into the air. The herdsman called to the animals, their voices rhythmic, part of the eternal song of Botswana. "Cattle do not hurry," she murmured, half to herself. "They take one step at a time, and so must we." The truth, she reminded herself, was like those cattle. It would appear on the horizon if she waited long enough, and until it did, her duty was to watch, to listen, and to gather every fragment of fact. Only then could she tell Mfo, the anxious young woman who had come to her in fear, what path lay ahead. And so the investigation had begun, not with accusations or confrontations, but with the quiet work of eyes and ears, of patience and steady thought. That was the way of the No.1 Ladies Detective Agency, and it was the way of Ma Ramotswe herself, to let the truth arrive in its own time, and to meet it with the calm strength that her father had always taught her to keep. The case of Mfo and her distracted fiancé was still turning in Ma Ramotswe's mind, but cases, like bread dough left to rise, could not be rushed. In the meantime, life continued with its ordinary demands, and at Tlokwen Road, Speedy Motors, there was always something to occupy the hours. On this particular day, she had walked across from the agency to find her husband, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, listening with great seriousness to the engine of an elderly van that rattled as though a family of snakes had made their home inside it. He bent forward, his head cocked, one hand resting gently on the bonnet, as if the van might reveal its secrets if only treated with kindness. Nearby, Charlie and Fanwell were engaged in their usual display of busyness, which looked convincing from a distance, but dissolved under closer inspection. They had a shiny Mercedes parked in front of them, and the two apprentices were polishing its bonnet with such dedication that one might have thought it belonged to them. Each rubbed with a flourish, pausing now and then to admire their reflections in the gleaming surface. "This is not proper work," declared Ma Makutsi, who had followed Precious across to the garage with a notebook still clutched in her hand. She adjusted her glasses so that they caught the light, magnifying the disapproval already present in her eyes. "This is the work of people who think life is about shining things instead of learning their trade." Charlie looked up with his usual grin. "But Ma, customers like to see their cars shine. A shiny car is a happy car." Fanwell nodded vigorously, as if this were an established principle taught in every garage in Botswana. "And a customer who sees a happy car will pay us more." "Nonsense!" snapped Ma Makutsi. What makes a customer happy is a gearbox that does not rattle and brakes that do not squeal like pigs at feeding time. Shining will not fix those things. Discipline will. Hard work will. That is what I learned at the Botswana Secretarial College, where I achieved 97%. That is the mark of a person who understands discipline. Her shoes, polished to a respectable gleam themselves, seemed to echo her words, tapping impatiently on the concrete floor. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni straightened from the van and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked from the apprentices to his wife's assistant with the mild expression of a man accustomed to such disputes. He did not raise his voice. He rarely did. Instead, he spoke as gently as if he were coaxing a reluctant nut to loosen from a rusty bolt. "Mama Kutsi is right," he said. "A car must be sound inside, not just on the outside. You cannot polish away a knocking sound in the engine." The apprentices shuffled their feet. Charlie gave the Mercedes one last affectionate rub, then stepped back reluctantly, as though parting from a beloved mirror. "Still," Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni continued, his voice softening, "there is no harm in polish, if it is done after the proper work. But the proper work must come first." It was a fair judgment, as always, and one that left both sides with dignity. Mama Kutsi nodded, satisfied that her wisdom had been confirmed, while the apprentices, though chastened, found comfort in the fact that Polish was not entirely forbidden. Watching all this, Ramotswe felt a wave of affection for her husband. He had the gift of patience, a quality as valuable in a mechanic as it was in a detective. She thought again of the case at hand, and how patience would also be required there. Young men, whether in love or in garages, were so easily distracted. Sometimes the distractions were harmless, like a fascination with shiny cars. Sometimes they were more dangerous, like the temptation to laugh too freely with another woman. She stepped forward now, adding her voice to the lesson. "These young men," she said kindly, "must be guided, not scolded. A young man is like a calf. If you shout at it, it runs the wrong way. If you lead it gently, it follows." Charlie brightened at being compared to a calf, which he took as a compliment, while Fanwell merely looked puzzled. "Yes," added Mama Kutsi firmly, "but even calves must learn discipline. Otherwise they will eat every pumpkin in the garden." Her remark brought laughter, even from Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, who was not given to loud amusement. The apprentices laughed too, though less confidently, sensing that the joke was at their expense. The moment eased the tension, and soon the sound of tools being fetched and engines being examined replaced the chatter. Work resumed, and the garage filled again with its familiar symphony of clinks and whirs, the music of ordinary life. As she returned to the office, Ramotswe reflected on the scene. The apprentices had much to learn, and Thabiso too had his own lessons waiting. Youth was always a time of mistakes, some quickly polished away like a smudge on a bonnet, others leaving deeper marks that only patience and honesty could repair. And that, she thought, was why detectives and mechanics were not so different after all. Both sought to mend what was out of order, to restore trust where it had been shaken, whether in a motor car or in a human heart. When a case became heavy on her mind, Ramotswe often turned her steps toward the orphan farm. It was not only that the children there lifted the spirits of even the most troubled visitor, though that was true. It was also that Ma Sylvia Potokwane, matron and master of that place, possessed a wisdom as sturdy as her frame and as persuasive as the slices of fruitcake she always pressed upon her guests. And so, one afternoon, After another day of quietly watching Thabiso at the post office, Precious drove her tiny white van out along the dusty road that led to the orphan farm. The land on that road stretched wide and golden, dotted with thorn trees and the occasional herd of cattle. The sun shone with all its usual generosity, but a small breeze carried relief, stirring the red earth into soft swirls. It was a familiar Botswana scene, and to Ma Ramotswe it never failed to remind her of her father, who had loved cattle and land above all things. "Promises are like cattle," he had once said. "They belong not only to the man who makes them, but to all who depend on them." When she arrived, children were playing a spirited game of football with a ragged ball, their laughter rising like birdsong. Others were chasing one another around the courtyard, their feet kicking up clouds of dust that caught the sunlight in brief golden flashes. Watching them, Ma Ramotswe felt her heart ease, even though her thoughts remained tethered to Mfo's fears. Ma Potokwane emerged from the office building, her arms already opened wide, her face alight with welcome. She wore her usual expression of determination, softened only by affection for her visitor. "Precious!" she exclaimed. "You have come at exactly the right time. I have made a new fruit cake, extra raisins this time. You will taste it and tell me if it is not the best yet." There was no possibility of refusing and no desire to do so. Soon the two women were seated in the small, neat sitting room with its checked curtains and polished table. A pot of tea steamed between them, and on a large plate sat generous slices of the promised fruit cake. As always, the first few minutes were given to praise. "This cake, Ma," said Precious, with genuine admiration, "is truly remarkable. You should open a bakery, not an orphan farm." Ma Potokwane beamed, her cheeks round with satisfaction. "If I opened a bakery, I would give away all the bread and go bankrupt. At least here I can feed children and no one asks me to make a profit." They laughed, but soon the talk turned serious. Ma Ramotswe set down her cup and explained the matter of Mfo and Thabiso, the silences, the laughter at the post office, the remarks of the cleaners. She spoke slowly, carefully, as detectives do, weighing her words as she laid them on the table like stones in a small cairn. When she had finished, Ma Potokwane shook her head firmly. "That young man is no good. If he makes her doubt before they are even married, what will he do afterward? A man who trifles with a woman's heart is not worth her tears." Her voice was strong, but not without compassion. She had seen too much sorrow in her work, not to feel for those who suffered it. "These men," she continued, "think they can smile here and there, and nobody will be hurt, but every smile, every promise is like a thread. Break it, and the whole cloth begins to unravel." Ma Ramotswe nodded, but she was not ready to condemn Thabiso outright. "Sometimes, Ma," she said gently, "fear makes people do foolish things. A young man may fear responsibility. He may fear failing as a husband or disappointing a wife who expects too much. Such fear can drive a man to hide, even when his heart is not wicked." For a moment, Ma Potokwane was silent, her broad hands folded on the table. At last she sighed. "Yes, that is also true. Fear is not the same as cruelty. Still, the woman is hurt just the same." In the quiet that followed, the laughter of children drifted in through the open window. One of them, a small boy with a loud voice, shouted triumphantly that he had scored a goal, and the others groaned in theatrical despair. Their game, so simple and so fierce, was a reminder that even in play, promises and rules mattered. Break them, and there was no game. Keep them, and the whole group rejoiced. Ma Ramotswe leaned back in her chair, her mind full of thoughts. This was more than a private matter between Mafo and Thabiso. When a promise was broken, the wound spread outward, first to the family who had spent their savings on goats, then to the neighbours who had celebrated the engagement, and finally to the community that believed in the bond of marriage as one of life's surest foundations. Responsibility, she realised again, was never just personal. It was a matter of the whole society. "I must be careful, Ma," she said softly. "If I tell the girl that her fiancé is unfaithful, I may destroy something that could be repaired. If I say nothing, I may allow her to walk into greater sorrow. The truth must be known, but the truth must also be handled with care." Ma Potokwane reached for the teapot and refilled both cups. Her eyes softened. "You will do what is right, precious. You always do. But remember, strength is needed not only for building houses, but for building families. If this young man is weak, he must grow stronger. And if he cannot, then better she knows before the wedding feast is cooked." The words settled like stones in Precious's mind, heavy but steady. She took another bite of fruitcake, its sweetness reminding her that even in sorrow there was always comfort to be found. When she left the orphan farm, the children waved at her, their voices bright against the sky. She waved back, thinking of the promises that must be kept for their sake, and for the sake of all who depended on honesty in a world where it was too easily forgotten. It was not enough to hear stories from cleaners or to observe from a distance. A detective must eventually meet her subject face to face, and so Ma Ramotswe decided that she would speak directly to Thabiso. The difficulty was how to arrange such a meeting without causing alarm or embarrassment. Fortunately, the post office offered its own natural excuse. People always had parcels to send, and she could be one of them. On the appointed day, she walked slowly along the pavement, her handbag heavy at her side and a small brown paper parcel tucked beneath her arm. It contained nothing more than an old book wrapped in newspaper, but it would serve. The post office doors opened with their usual squeak, and inside the air smelled of dust and envelopes, of the faint tang of ink. Clerks worked at their counters, stamping and weighing, while customers waited patiently in lines that never seemed to move. Thabiso stood at the far end, his hair carefully oiled, his tie straight. He looked respectable, as a clerk should, but when his eyes lifted and met hers, she saw at once the quick flicker of unease. He did not know her, yet something in her calm gaze unsettled him. Perhaps that was the gift of a true detective, to reflect back a man's own doubts. "Good morning, Rara," she said pleasantly when it was her turn at his counter. She set down the parcel. "I should like to send this, please. It is only a book for a cousin. Nothing important." He weighed it, scribbled on a slip of paper, and cleared his throat. "Yes, Ma, that will be fine." His hands were steady enough, but his eyes shifted, as though searching for a place to rest. "I have heard you are engaged," she said conversationally. "That is a fine thing. Engagements bring joy to families." He looked startled, then recovered himself. "Yes, Ma, I am engaged." "But sometimes," she continued gently, "a young man may find such promises heavy. A wife, a family, these are great responsibilities. Not every man feels ready, even when he has given his word." The words hung between them like a challenge wrapped in kindness. Thabiso swallowed. His eyes darted again, this time toward the floor. "It is not that I do not care for her," he said at last, his voice low. But I wonder if I will make a good husband. What if I fail her? What if I cannot provide? Marriage is not only happiness, Ma, it is expense. Goats must be bought, a house maintained. Sometimes I think I am not yet ready. There it was. Not denial, not confession, but hesitation. Ma Ramotswe listened carefully, her face unreadable. She knew too well the difference between fear and dishonesty. Men could be weak without being wicked, yet weakness left others in pain just the same. She was about to reply when her sharp eyes caught a detail. From his breast pocket, a folded slip of paper protruded. It was a cinema ticket stub, brightly coloured, with yesterday's date stamped across it. He had claimed to be working late the evening before. This much Mfo had already told her. But a man working late at the post office did not emerge with cinema stubs in his pocket. Her gaze lingered on it for only a moment, enough to mark the fact. A clue was like a shy animal. If you lunged at it, it would vanish. Better to notice quietly, to keep it in mind until the right time came. She drew her eyes back to his face. "All men fear marriage a little," she said kindly. "Even the strongest men. But if a promise has been made, it must be faced with courage. That is what makes a man strong, not running away." He nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, Ma, I understand." But his eyes did not hold hers for long. They skittered away, restless, as though looking for escape. And she thought, this is a man standing on a thin line between truth and deceit. One step either way, and a young woman's future may be broken. When she left the post office, the sun was blazing down, baking the pavement until the heat rose in waves. She paused, lifting her face to the light, her mind full of concern. It was never easy to know the whole truth of people's hearts. They hid from themselves as much as from others, and in that hiding they left behind trails of half-truths, as confusing as paths in the bush where cattle had wandered without order. Still, the ticket stub remained in her thoughts. That small slip of paper, so ordinary, might yet prove to be the sign that pointed toward the real story. And until she could follow that sign, Mfo's hope and sorrow would remain balanced on uncertain ground. That evening of the post office interview day, when the heat of the day had softened and the wide sky of Botswana revealed its thousands of stars, Ma Precious Ramotswe sat outside on the veranda at Zebra Drive. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of children calling to one another in the neighbourhood and the faint rattle of a bicycle passing down the road. The fire she had built earlier glowed gently in the metal brazier, throwing out enough warmth to keep the evening chill at bay. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her large figure wrapped in the serenity of the night, and allowed her thoughts to wander. The events of the past few days returned to her, as they always did when she sat alone. She thought of Mfo, that young woman with anxious eyes, who carried her hopes in the fragile basket of an engagement. She thought of Thabiso, who had looked away too quickly, whose words had slipped from one meaning to another without quite settling on the truth. And she thought of the cinema ticket, a small clue that spoke more loudly than any of his halting admissions. What is honesty? She asked herself. A promise, once spoken, was meant to be a solid thing, as strong as a fence post driven deep into the earth. Yet people often treated their promises like feathers, tossing them into the air without thought, surprised when the wind carried them away. Her father, Obed Ramotswe, had always said that cattle were valuable because they endured. A good herd would feed a family for many years, giving milk, calves, and strength to pull the plough. But people could change overnight, as swiftly as the wind that bent the acacia trees. She stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers flare. The truth about people, she knew, was not that they were unreliable by nature. It was that they sometimes forgot the weight of their words. They made promises in moments of happiness, or out of a desire to please, not realizing how heavily those words would sit upon another person's heart. And when the time came to carry those promises, they felt the burden too great and looked for a way to slip free. The veranda door creaked, and Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi stepped out. He had been repairing something in his workshop, his hands still carrying the faint smell of oil and metal, but he had washed and now wore his comfortable evening shirt. He lowered himself into the chair beside his wife with the slow care of a man whose knees had worked too long under motor cars. "You are quiet, Ma," he said gently. "That means you are thinking about something serious." She smiled, turning her face toward him. "I am thinking about promises, how easily they are made and how easily they are broken." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that is true. Men especially. Men sometimes forget what their words mean. They say, 'I will be there,' or 'I will do that,' and then the next day they do something else. They think it is nothing, but it is not nothing." There was no bitterness in his tone, only the mild regret of a man who had observed life closely. He had always been a fair judge of men, this husband of hers, perhaps because he spent his days repairing machines that revealed their faults honestly. A car that rattled did not pretend otherwise. It did not smile while hiding a broken part. People, unfortunately, were not so straightforward. "I saw a man today who is engaged," she said, "but his heart is not steady. He is caught between truth and lies, and the woman who waits for him cannot know which way he will turn." Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi looked out at the stars. "Some men are weak," he said at last. "It does not always mean they are bad, but weakness can hurt as much as cruelty." She considered his words. Weakness and cruelty were not the same, yet to the one who suffered, the pain was little different. Empho's heart did not care whether Thabiso had lied from malice or from fear. It cared only that his promise wavered. "I sometimes wonder," she said softly, "how we can expect people to be strong when life is so full of temptations and fears. But then I think of my father. He was never rich, but he never broke his word. Perhaps strength comes not from what we have, but from remembering that our words belong not only to us, but to those who depend upon them." The fire crackled, sending a small shower of sparks into the night air. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed, its voice rising like a reminder that cattle, steady and enduring, still grazed beneath the same stars that had guided their ancestors. Mr. J.L.B. Mattaconi reached across and patted her hand. "You will find the truth, Ma. You always do. And whatever it is, you will help that girl. That is what you do best." She returned the pressure of his hand, feeling the deep comfort of his presence. He was not a man of grand speeches, but his quiet reliability was a promise more solid than any words. And as she looked at him, she felt again the truth that had guided her through so many cases, that kindness and patience were stronger than fear, and that even in the face of human frailty there was hope. The fire burned lower, the embers glowing red. She would sleep soon, but for now she let the silence stretch, broken only by the sounds of Botswana at night, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the soft hum of insects. Above it all, The stars shone with their steady light, as if to remind her that while people might falter, the sky at least remained faithful. If there was one thing that could be relied upon in Gaborone, it was that Ma Grace Makutsi would never allow injustice, or what she considered injustice, to pass without comment. And so, after hearing about Thabiso's shifty eyes and slippery words, she began to feel the indignation build up in her like a kettle left too long on the stove. On the following afternoon, it had boiled over. She declared to her shoes, which always seemed to agree with her, that men could not be trusted, and that if the case were left entirely to Ma Ramotswe, kindness might obscure the truth. It was therefore her duty, as assistant detective and proud graduate of the Botswana Secretarial College, 97% no less, to conduct an inquiry of her own. That was why she stationed herself outside the post office in the late afternoon, behind a small jacaranda tree whose purple blossoms carpeted the pavement. She peered over her glasses, notebook at the ready, determined to catch Thabiso in an act of betrayal. She did not have to wait long. Soon enough, there he was, emerging from the doors, his tie loosened, his face carrying that half-nervous, half-expectant look of a man who thought he was unseen. And beside him, there was the woman, the one with the bright earrings, walking close enough that their shoulders brushed now and then. Ma Makutsi's lips tightened. "Aha!" she muttered to herself, caught red-handed. She followed them, discreet in her own mind, though somewhat less so in practice, for her shoes clicked loudly against the pavement. Still, the couple ahead paid no attention, too absorbed in their conversation. They walked down the main street and into a small cafe, one of those places with checkered tablecloths and faded posters of Coca-Cola on the walls. From her vantage point outside, Makutsi could see them seated together, leaning in, laughing softly, their hands resting perilously close. She scribbled furiously in her notebook, underlining her observations twice. This was evidence, solid, undeniable evidence, and she would bring it to the agency in the morning, like a hunter laying down the spoils of a successful chase. The next day, she swept into the office with her discovery burning on her tongue. "Ma Ramotswe," she announced, her glasses flashing like searchlights. "The case is solved. That man is guilty. I saw him with my own eyes, dining with the woman, laughing with her, behaving in a most unfiancé-like manner." Precious looked up from her desk, where she had been carefully writing out a list of unpaid bills. She did not look startled. She rarely did. Instead, she regarded her assistant with that calm patience that had so often slowed Grace's gallop toward premature conclusions. "You saw him with the woman?" she asked gently. "Yes, Ma. Sitting in a cafe, laughing like two young lovers." There was a pause. "And what did they say?" "I could not hear," admitted Grace reluctantly. "But I could see, and seeing is believing." "Sometimes," said Ma Ramotswe softly, "seeing is only part of the truth. We must be careful not to harm the girl with words that may not tell the whole story." Her tone was not scolding, merely reminding, but it was enough to make Makutsi's shoes creak in protest. Still, she subsided, though her notebook remained open on the desk like a witness eager to testify. Later that afternoon, Precious arranged a quiet meeting with the young woman in question. It was not difficult to find her. Gaborone was not so large that people remained hidden for long. They sat together under the shade of an acacia tree, away from curious ears. The woman, whose name was Naledi, looked surprised but not defensive. "Oh, Thabiso. He is my cousin," she said readily. We come from the same village, near Seraway. He has been helping me since I arrived in Gaborone to find work. I have little family here, so he feels it is his duty. We eat together sometimes because I have no one else. But there is nothing more." The words were spoken with such straightforward honesty that Precious believed them at once. She asked a few more careful questions, but each answer confirmed the same story. Naledi was indeed his cousin, and he had been giving her small help, money, advice, companionship, without telling Empho. His secrecy, she explained, came from embarrassment. He feared Empho would see it as weakness, or as proof that he was not ready to be a husband. When Precious returned to the office, she found Ma Makutsi still bristling with righteous certainty. She listened to the explanation with pursed lips, her glasses flashing in indignation. "Cousin or no cousin, it is wrong to keep secrets," she insisted. "If my Futi ever did such a thing, eating quietly with cousins behind my back, I would not tolerate it." "No," said Ma Ramotswe. "Secrets are never good in a marriage. But sometimes a man hides because he is ashamed, not because he is wicked. Thabiso has been foolish, yes, but he has not been faithless." The office fell quiet, except for the buzzing of a fly at the window. Grace's shoes gave a disapproving creak, but even they seemed to admit that truth was often less dramatic than suspicion. For Precious, the matter was clearer now. The case was not about betrayal, but about silence, about the failure to trust those who most deserved it. That, she thought, was the danger of half-truths. They left a space for fear to grow, and in that space, love could wither. 2 days later, Empho returned to the little office at Zebra Drive. She came hesitantly, her step slower than on her first visit, her eyes cast down as though she feared to meet the truth head-on. The day was warm, with a faint haze rising off the road, and she paused at the gate as if gathering her strength before coming inside. Ma Ramotswe, who had been expecting her, rose from her desk and welcomed her warmly. "Dumela, Ma, you are most welcome. Come in and sit down. We have been waiting for you." Ma Makutsi, already seated with her notebook open, adjusted her glasses with a brisk snap. She had been prepared to declare guilt in bold letters, but after Naledi's explanation, she had resigned herself, reluctantly, to letting Ma Ramotswe take the lead. Empho sat down in the same chair she had occupied before. Her hands, tightly clasped in her lap, betrayed the nervousness she carried. She looked at Precious with searching eyes. "You have found out something, Ma. Please tell me. I have not slept well. My dreams are full of shadows." Precious leaned forward, her voice soft and steady. "Yes, Ma, we have learned the truth, but you must be strong as you listen. It is not as bad as you feared, but it is not as simple as you hoped." Empho nodded quickly, her lips pressed together. "Your fiancé has not been unfaithful," said Ma Ramotswe. "The woman you saw him with is his cousin, Naledi, who comes from his home village. She has been here in Gaborone alone, and he has been helping her, eating meals with her, walking with her, giving her advice. He kept this from you not because he does not love you, but because he was ashamed. He feared you might think he was weak, or that he was not ready for marriage if you saw how much his family depended on him." The words fell gently, but their weight was still heavy. Empho's shoulders dropped in relief, yet her brow furrowed in fresh hurt. "So it is true. There is no other woman, only his cousin?" "That is the truth," confirmed Ma Ramotswe. "But Ma, it is also true that he did not trust you with it, and that is a wound, even if it was made by fear rather than cruelty." For a moment, Empho was silent, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly brushed away. "I am glad, Ma," she whispered. "Glad that he has not betrayed me. But why did he not tell me? Why must I learn of it from strangers? Does he not know that I would have understood?" Grace, unable to restrain herself, interjected. "Men do not think like women. They keep secrets because they believe they are clever, when in fact they are foolish. If my Footy ever tried such a thing, well, he would soon learn what it means to live without fruitcake." Her remark, half serious and half comic, broke the tension for a moment. Even Empho managed a small laugh through her tears, though it quickly faded. Ma Ramotswe reached out and placed her hand lightly on the young woman's arm. "Forgiveness, Ma, is a great gift, but it cannot be given without a promise in return. If you choose to continue with this engagement, you must ask him for honesty in all things. Marriage is not built on secrecy, it is built on openness. Without that, even love cannot stand steady." Empho looked down, considering these words. "I love him," she said softly, "and I do not wish to lose him, but I cannot marry a man who hides his life from me." "Then that is what you must tell him," Precious replied, not in anger, but in firmness. "Tell him that you will forgive, but only if he promises to walk beside you with no more secrets. If he accepts, then you will go forward together. If not, then better to know now than later, when the whole village has gathered and the goats are already cooked." The image brought a faint smile to Empho's face. "You are right, Ma. It is better to know before the goats are cooked." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the only sound the rustle of papers on Ma Makutsi's desk. Outside, the sky was bright with afternoon light, and the distant call of a dove drifted through the open window. At last, Empho rose. "Thank you, Ma Ramotswe. You have given me the truth, and you have given me courage. Whatever happens now, I will walk with open eyes." When she had gone, Grace shook her head and closed her notebook with a snap. "Men," she said, "always hiding, always fearing. If they only listened to women, life would be much easier." Precious smiled faintly, her thoughts already drifting toward the fire she would sit beside that evening. Men were flawed, yes, but so were women, and the great task of life was not perfection, but forgiveness. The case had not ended in betrayal, but it had revealed a lesson all the same, that love without trust was like cattle without water, alive for a time, but not for long. Life in Botswana always moved forward as the cattle moved across the veld, slowly, steadily, without much drama. Even after cases that weighed on the heart, there was the comfort of ordinary days, of work and meals, of the sun rising and setting with unfailing faithfulness. For Ma Ramotswe, this rhythm was both her greatest solace and her deepest lesson, that no matter what happened in people's lives, there was always another morning, another cup of tea, another chance to try again. At Tlokwen Road, Speedy Motors, life was showing signs of its own small triumphs. The apprentices, usually more skilled in polishing bonnets than repairing engines, had been given the task of fixing a troublesome gearbox. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni had assigned it to them reluctantly, expecting to be called in at the last moment to rescue the job. But this time, to everyone's surprise, Charlie and Fanwell worked together with unusual seriousness. They consulted manuals, argued only a little, and even refrained from leaving greasy rags on the floor. 2 days later, when the gearbox finally purred without complaint, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni bent over it, listening with the solemn concentration of a doctor checking a patient's heartbeat. At last he straightened, wiped his hands on a cloth, and gave a small, satisfied nod. "Well done, boys," he said quietly. "This is proper work." The apprentices beamed as if they had just been awarded degrees. Charlie puffed out his chest, declaring that he had always known he was destined for mechanical greatness, while Fanwell smiled more modestly, his relief showing in the way he finally allowed himself to breathe. It was then that Ma Makutsi, standing nearby with her arms folded, softened her expression. "You see," she remarked, "even young men can sometimes learn responsibility. It only takes discipline, and perhaps a little encouragement from their superiors." Her glasses glinted, as if they too were pleased with the apprentice's progress. Her shoes, though less easily impressed, gave only a faint creak of disapproval. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, too kind to point out how rare this success was, simply smiled. "Yes, they are learning, slowly, like cattle. Like very slow cattle," added Ma Makutsi, though her voice carried a note of forgiveness. Later that week, back at the agency, a small envelope arrived addressed to Ma Ramotswe. The handwriting was neat but uncertain, the kind of hand that belonged to someone unused to writing letters. She opened it carefully and found a note from Mfo. "Dear Ma Ramotswe," it read, "I wish to thank you for helping me see the truth. Thabiso and I have spoken, and he has told me everything. He was afraid, yes, but he has promised never to keep secrets again. We have decided to move forward, but more carefully, and with honesty between us. I cannot say the future will be easy, but at least now we walk together with open eyes. Yours sincerely, Mfo." Precious read the note aloud, her voice carrying the words into the quiet of the office. Grace listened intently, her glasses flashing with restrained judgment, but she said nothing until the letter was finished. "Well," she declared at last, "it is not what I would have done. If a man hides things before marriage, he may hide more afterward. But," she added grudgingly, "perhaps he will learn if she is firm with him." Ma Ramotswe folded the note and placed it on her desk. "People do learn, Ma. Sometimes slowly, sometimes after mistakes. But they do learn." She poured tea for both of them, the red bush tea steaming gently in the late afternoon light. They sipped in silence for a while, each woman thinking her own thoughts. Grace considered Futi, her own husband, whose honesty was unquestionable, if sometimes accompanied by clumsiness. Precious thought of her own father's words. "Cattle endure because they are steady. A man must endure too, if he is to be trusted." The office window looked out onto the street, where the day was beginning its slow turn toward evening. The sunlight stretched long shadows across the earth, painting the ground in warm gold. It was one of those moments when Botswana seemed to gather all its beauty into a single hour, the dusty road glowing like a river of amber, the trees standing tall and wise, the air carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant fires. "Yes," said Precious softly, setting her cup down. "Life is never free of troubles, but it is always worth living with kindness and patience." Grace gave a small nod, her face thoughtful. "Patience," she echoed, as if testing the word. At that moment, Charlie and Fanwell appeared at the door, still grinning from their gearbox victory. They carried a small box of sweets they had bought with their own money, something almost unheard of, and offered them to the two ladies. "We thought you should celebrate with us," Charlie announced proudly. "A gearbox is like a heart, and this one is beating again." The gesture was clumsy, but sincere. Ma Ramotswe laughed and accepted a sweet, while Grace, though pretending to be unimpressed, also took one. "Perhaps," she said reluctantly, "these boys are not entirely hopeless." The apprentices, delighted by such high praise, departed again, leaving the office filled with the sound of laughter. As the sun dipped lower, Precious leaned back in her chair, her heart full. She thought of Mpho and Thabiso, of the apprentices, of her dear husband across the road, and of the children at the orphan farm who laughed even when life was hard. All of them were part of the same great fabric, woven together by promises and mistakes, by forgiveness and persistence. She poured the last of the tea, its warmth rising like a final blessing on the day. Outside, the golden light of Botswana draped the land in its familiar embrace, promising another morning, another chance. 2 evenings later, the sun was slipping down the sky when Ma Precious Ramotswe returned to her veranda. The day had been long, but now it gave way to that most treasured of hours in Botswana, the time when the earth glowed with deep oranges and purples, when the air cooled, and when even the cattle seemed to pause in their grazing to watch the light fade. She lowered herself into her familiar chair, the one that had held her through so many evenings, and reached for her cup of red bush tea. The steam curled upward, soft against the gathering dusk, and she let the first sip settle into her. It was not only a drink, but a comfort, a reminder that the world, despite its troubles, could always be met with calm. Her mind, as always in such moments, drifted to the people whose lives had passed through hers in recent days. She thought of Mpho, that young woman with her earnest face and her fragile heart. She had feared betrayal and found instead a man too weak to trust her with the truth. Yet from that weakness had come the chance for honesty, a chance for love to take root again, more carefully but perhaps more deeply. Ma Ramotswe felt a quiet hope for them both. If Mpho could forgive, and if Thabiso could learn to be steady, then their marriage might yet endure, like cattle through a dry season. She thought too of the apprentices at the garage, whose triumph over the gearbox had made them beam like schoolboys who had solved a riddle. Charlie with his restless bravado, Fanwell with his cautious diligence, each in his own way, had taken a small step toward manhood. And there was her dear husband, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, whose patience with them had reminded her once again that the gentlest guidance often bore the sweetest fruit. A faint smile touched her lips as she remembered Mama Kutsi, storming into the office with her discoveries, her glasses blazing with indignation. Dear Grace, so quick to condemn, so quick to forgive, always ready to remind the world of her 97%. Beneath her sharp words beat a loyal heart, one that wanted the best for others, even if she expressed it in the form of stern lectures. Botswana, thought Ma Ramotswe, was fortunate to have such women in it. The fireflies began their dance in the garden, tiny sparks in the dimming air. She leaned back and let the silence of evening enfold her. In that silence, she could almost hear her father's voice. Obed Ramotswe, cattleman and wise guide, had often spoken of truth as if it were a herd. Cattle must be cared for, Precious. If you leave them to wander, they will stray, and you will lose them. Truth is the same. You must tend it, guide it, protect it, so that it does not slip away. Yes, she thought now, promises and truth both needed tending. Left untended, they strayed, but with care they gave milk and calves, strength and hope. Mfo and Thabiso had nearly let their truth wander, but perhaps now they would learn to keep it close, to guard it together. Her gaze lifted to the vast Botswana sky, deepening now to indigo, the first stars pricking its surface. People, she reflected, were often foolish, often weak, but they were also capable of astonishing love, of forgiveness that healed wounds, of kindness that made burdens lighter. That was the mystery of human beings, flawed and yet redeemable, stumbling yet always finding ways to rise again. She finished the last sip of tea, setting the cup gently on the table. The night was coming, and with it the quiet that would spread across Zebra Drive, across Gaborone, across the whole land. She breathed deeply, drawing into the sense of earth and evening smoke, and let her heart settle in peace. Life was never free of troubles, that much she knew, but it was always worth living with kindness and patience. And as the last light faded, she felt grateful once more to be part of this land, these people, this endless rhythm of days and nights, promises broken and kept, sorrows and joys shared. Botswana, her beloved country, rested beneath its starry sky, and so did she.